Namaskar and welcome to Media Scan. We are back with your weekend dose of headlines, controversies and perspectives. After a clear anti-India bias in their reportage and columns, some prominent Western newspapers are now featuring big ads that openly defame India and spread hatred against the majority community. So, is this now a new tool for the enemies of the nation? We will examine it in a few moments, but before that, let's check out what made news. Government of India has started fulfilling its promise of 10 lakh jobs. Kicking off the mega recruitment drive, Prime Minister Narendra Modi handed the first tranche of 75,000 appointment letters this weekend. These appointments range across 38 different ministries and departments of the centre and will include both gazetted and non-gazetted positions. From snow-capped peaks of Kedarnath to the shores of the Arabian Sea, PM Modi is touring across places of major cultural and spiritual significance during the pious Deepavali week. He was in Kevadia in Gujarat, from where he travelled to Kedarnath and Badrinath Dham. He also laid the foundation of many connectivity projects worth 3,400 crore rupees to boost tourism and infrastructure in the Himalayan state. Earlier this week, PM Modi threw open the Def Expo 2022 at the Mahatma Mandir in Gandhinagar. Inaugurating the big-ticket defence event, Prime Minister said Def Expo displayed a grand picture of New India. He said this event was unique because this time round the Def Expo featured only Indian companies, thus giving a huge push to Make in India. Rajya Sabha member and veteran Congress leader Mallikarjun Kharge is the new president of the Congress party and the first non-Gandhi to get the post in 2.5 decades. Kharge polled 7,897 votes out of the 9,300 odd delegates. But his rival Shashi Tharoor also managed to get 1,072 votes, a very high number compared to the challengers in previous elections. Union Cabinet has announced the minimum support price for major rabi crops. Wheat MSP has been raised by 110 rupees per quintal. That is a hike of 5.46%. MSPs of other rabi crops such as lentils, gram, rapeseed, barley and mustard have also been hiked likewise, ranging from 2 to 9%. Viewers, the Wall Street Journal recently published an advertisement openly demanding sanctions against senior ministers of India, senior judges and even top businessmen. Not just that, the New York Times has been repeatedly publishing advertisements which peddle hate against India and try to run down our democracy. So, after the blatantly anti-India bias, are these advertisements becoming a new tool in the hands of the anti-India lobby? And why are top media houses providing them a platform? Let's discuss. Joining me from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, Professor Heeraman Tiwari. You have heard him on Media Scan on several occasions. He is also a professor in the Media Studies Department of JNU. He will be able to help us understand what's really going on. Welcome, Professor Heeraman Tiwari. So nice to have you back, sir.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be on your show.
And our special guest this evening, joining me straight from the US, from Philadelphia, Suhag Shukla, a well-known activist. She is the executive director of the Hindu American Foundation, known to speak her mind openly. Very glad to have you on our show, Suhag Shukla. Namaskar.
Namaste. Thanks for having me.
And my first question also comes to you, Suhag Shukla. As I said, are these advertisements becoming a kind of a tool? Because stories and reportage gets called out, so very convenient for the media platforms to say that, oh, this is just a paid advertisement, and they can shrug off the editorial responsibility. Do you agree?
Well, unfortunately, I think that these advertisements and the propaganda that they're perpetrating are actually a reflection of what goes for or passes as reportage in today's mediascape. Indian nationals, whether they're reporters or whether they're paid advertisers, are increasingly using Western media to pick their political battles in India. And in the Wall Street Journal instance, it seems that maybe it's even their personal battles. And the narrative is kind of typeset. Who's the perpetrator of fascism, genocide, a killer of democracy? It's the current government of India, and specifically Hindus. Who's the victim? Religious minorities, women, and marginalized communities. And so this typesetting, whether it's an advertisement, whether it's a report, is bleeding into how Hindu Americans, and not just Hindu Americans, but British Hindus and Hindus in the diaspora across the world are covered.
So, Suhag Shukla, would you say this is political, this is religious or community focused, or both?
I think it's a combination of things. If we look at the New York Times ad, it's the usual suspects of separatist organizations, Islamist organizations, and evangelically funded organizations, and their allies that have paid for the ad. So you see misinformation about the Citizenship Amendment Act, about the legal status of Muslims and Christians in India. So it's a combination.
Right. So thank you for putting it so clearly. And I shall come to Professor Heeraman Tiwari on this. Allow me to bring him into the discussion. Professor Tiwari, very well-known open source intelligence platforms, particularly the Disinfo Lab also, have come out with the fact that most of these organizations who issue the ads are actually, they carry very innocuous names, but they are actually funded or they are promoted by organizations like the Jamaat, the ISI, the Muslim Brotherhood, and that entire enemies of the nation lobby. So, what would you say you feel when you see these ads, particularly on the WSJ ad, which we have come to know now was clearly funded or even published by someone who is a proclaimed economic offender, a fugitive of the country?
Absolutely. And as Smita ji, as Suhag ji has already told you, that's a combination of facts and things which resulted in this kind of very abominable propaganda against India. This is not new, although this latest ad and the people behind it have been exposed. Suhag Shukla herself has exposed a couple of other prominent Indians or so-called prominent Indians living in the United States supporting this kind of ads or propaganda against India, against Hindus, and even against Hindus living in the United States. This economic offender, of course, who is waiting to be brought to Indian prisons, will do everything to use his financial power. And as you said yourself, there are all kinds of separatist groups and Islamist jihadis, even Khalistanis, and all of them mixed with some of the people who are excited about so-called caste system, even in today's India, adding in and connecting it to God knows when, and all these heady mixture of cocktail that is coming up. And behind this, I believe, is this jealousy, is this hatred against India's rise. And I must say, I may be wrong, and Suhagji might correct me from sitting there from the United States, that in the last 2.5 years in particular, when the world was reeling under this magnitude of devastating pandemic, India somehow managed to sail through comfortably, if not wonderfully, and this adds to this jealousy, this hatred, this I would even call it racism against India. How could this country, which is barely a few decades ago, was under
allow me to ask her that question, since you've pointed out. Suhag Shukla, as Professor Tiwari was just saying, is it true that these attacks, if I may say, or these kind of reflection of people's bias has been around earlier, Or is it particularly because India continues to rise in the Committee of Nations and we have managed to make ourselves, stand up with pride despite the most difficult global circumstances?
I would actually say it goes back even further. I found in our work that 2014 was a pivotal moment when the BJP came into power. It I don't know if it caught people by surprise because it was pretty obvious the direction that the country was going. And so since 2014, we've seen this activist journalism, especially vis-a-vis India, that has taken root. Now, it was this bias against India has always been kind of at a low simmer. Little things, exoticizing poverty, focusing on poverty, focusing on things that a Western audience might find grotesque. Those are the types of stereotypes and negative portrayals that we've been accustomed to. Many of us growing up in this country would always be asked questions the day after there would be a show about something horrible happening in India. And so this cherry picked of the most negative or the most grotesque became the story of India. And that's something that's been probably since colonial times. But
so, Suhag
2014,
Shukla, are you
was that
hinting,
moment.
are you saying that this kind of, a bias which was on a low simmer may probably have become really strident or aggravated since 2014? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that we also have to take a step back and look at the broader shifts in the media industry. One thing is that, and this dates back much further, but the shift to online content and social media, that has really created a pressure cooker situation for mainstream media. First of all, the world is inundated with content, so there's no real way to discern fact from fiction. There's more competition for eyeballs or views. There's been major shifts in the profit model in the media industry, and media has been hurting financially because of this shift from print to online media and social media. So we, at least here from the work that we do with the Hindu American Foundation, have seen a major reduction in the number of full-time reporters that any major media house will have on staff. We even some, and so what that has led to is a shift from, say, traditional advertising as a major source of revenue to a subscription model. Advertisers, I think, don't want things to get so politicized, don't want a newspaper to be polarized. They want a newspaper to have readers from all different backgrounds. However, a subscription model, I think, caters to a particular crowd. It's so that reporters are almost tempted, and we see this all the time, they're tempted to not just gather and present information. They want to report both through, reporting is rather more editorializing.
I guess that is a larger question, of course, related to this problem in hand. But Suhag Shukla, it also makes me curious whether the Wall Street Journal or the NYT are so broke that when they know very clearly there is an agenda-based advertisement, it's not advertising a product, so to say, and yet they give it space. However, I shall have to come to Professor Tiwari here on one question, and then I'd like to come back to you on what the Indian community feels when they see these ads. So I'll come to Professor Tiwari here. Professor Tiwari, a very constant question when it comes to this blatant bias of the Western media towards the Indian establishment or the Indian people is, how much attention should we pay to them? Take this WSJ advertisement, for example. There are people who believe that why should we at all be worried about what is being published there, even whether it is an advertisement or an opinion or whatever, while there are others who believe that allowing them to peddle their propaganda is really not a good idea. There needs to be engagement, there needs to be a counter. Where do you stand, sir?
I think, let me say two things. One, I think Suhag is absolutely right that this is decades old simmering feeling against India, because Indians are, as we read the stories and we know personally, are prospering in their fields, in wherever they go, in the United States, in Europe. So that is one aspect. And there is another aspect which he mentioned, which is extremely important: the finances. So if you remember, the date 16th of May 2014 starts darkening the world for those whom we call wokes, even in India. So it serves the Indian interest as well. There is of course an audience for these ads, these kinds of stories emanating from Western media, particularly from America, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street journals. So there is an audience in India. And the third point is that in today's world, where India is the country which has the largest number of internet users, so the stories would travel. So the idea, therefore, is that I would not worry too much about it. As I said, that they are jealous, they are biased against it. But the narrative, the response from India should be very, very coordinated in a way, and controlled and nuanced. Because India is confident enough to take these things, and India must also take care of the Indian expatriates in the United States, in Europe, whose interests should be protected. And that is the responsibility of a powerful nation that India is becoming. So I think we should take note, but in a very calibrated manner, in a nuanced manner. And I think the government has responded. And we on social media and media, of course, are responding. And the final point I wanted to make, that it is true, as Suhag ji said, that today the print media, the online media, the difference has blurred. Therefore, the finances need to come from various sources. So these ads are not just spewing hate against India, they also bring revenue to those who are doing it. And obviously, those who are propagating it or are offering the platforms for such obnoxious, abominable ads are, against, very jealous of India. That's one word. I'm sorry to repeat myself.
Let me take it to Suhag Shukla, since you have spoken very clearly about what you think needs to be done at this stage. Suhag Shukla, first question: how is the Indian community taking these entire series of ads? What is the buzz in the community, since you interact and engage with them regularly? And secondly, what do you think is the answer to it? Should we simply ignore it and let them do what they want? Should we also come out with similar material? Should we try to engage at a bigger level? What, in your eyes, is the way out?
So in terms of the reaction of the community, it's frustration, it's anger, but it's something that unfortunately we're growing accustomed to. You know, activist journalism, especially with regards to India and ground realities there, entails selective inclusion and omission of information. But omission is a half-truth and a half-truth is a lie. And that is kind of the state of reportage on India, especially in major papers like the New York Times and the Washington Post and others. The cost, you know, there's obviously, there's challenges for us as religious minorities and ethnic minorities in this country, when you have a continual drumbeat demonizing an entire people. It's going to have an impact on how people view us here. In spite of our contributions to this country, this steady drumbeat of negative news, of portraying Indians and Hindus as fascists, as violent, as anti-minority, takes a toll. Democracy also bears the cost. Democracy requires an engaged and informed public, and that is dependent on an open and free press. But that press also has a responsibility to be transparent and abide by certain ethics, and that's not happening. So whether it's the cost that we personally bear, or that we bear as citizens of democracies, both in the United States and in India, the cost is high. And as far as what the community needs to do, I think we need to turn back to our dharmic principles. And I would not want to see our community stoop to their level. I think that truth has to always be our guide, and eventually truth prevails. And while there's a lot of noise, I think that there's a silent majority that's getting fed up with the types of things that we're seeing push through the media. I also think that we need to keep an eye on the big picture. And the fact is that the US-India relationship is a strong relationship. So whatever we're seeing in the New York Times or in the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post is not really having an impact where it really matters.
I think that's a very mature and a well-thought response, Suhag Shukla. But nevertheless, the fact remains that you have a set of think tanks on the one hand, then there are lobbies who want to put out advertisements and material like these, and then there is the inherent bias in the media. When you put all together, doesn't it become really challenging for the community?
It does, absolutely. But there's nothing stopping us from building our own think tanks, from building
Right.
institutions like the Hindu American Foundation. I mean, we've been around for 19 years, and one of our pillars is providing accurate and credible information to journalists who really care about doing their job, which is to provide credible, transparent, neutral information to the reader and lead the reader not into what to think, but how to think. And there is that scope, and it is happening.
So I'm just curious, are there takers for this kind of reportage that you said you are engaging in the media? Very quickly, Suhag.
Absolutely, there are. And just to your point in terms of can we also invest in advertisements? Just this past weekend, we lit up a Times Square building with just a Happy Diwali message. And there was a QR code that would lead anyone who saw that ad to a landing page that would educate them on the significance of Diwali. So there is scope always in investing in advertising, right? But
so
we don't have
propaganda versus positive engagement, positive information. Let me put a question to Professor Heeraman Tiwari here, and then if time permits, I shall come back to you. Professor Tiwari, if people in the open source intelligence, if people on the social media, other informed citizens know where the funding and where the power, the promotion of these advertisements comes from, doesn't the Western media know it? I mean, it's a little difficult to digest. What do you say?
No, of course they do, and they are doing it purposefully. It's not that they are ignorant and they're just simply looking for an ad and they will simply publish it. You know the process, being in the media yourself, and
Yes.
Suhagji there, you know there is a process to be gone through to verify that. But the idea still is, as you see India getting stronger, richer, and in many ways, you will find such things where, and as I said, I come back to this point that India has an audience for such ads where people, you and I know, and many people are exposing them on social media. Whether this has any impact or not, but the two P's that you mentioned, I like this propaganda and of course positivism, with the strength that India has, both economic, moral, human resource, all these things put together. And as Suhagji said, we have a wonderful relationship, and that relationship is mutual, it's not one-sided. If that is BCD with India in a university or institution becomes expert on any subject under the sun in India, and we don't want to name these people, and we
Yes.
know them. So there are Americans, I'm sorry, Suhagji, if you don't like it. I mean, there are very few people who know about India, the history of India, what India is so limited as far as the access to this knowledge is concerned among Americans. I don't want to patronize them, but that is the point. But where the danger also lurks there, because if
Professor Tiwari, I'll have to stop you here, sir, because I want to put the last word to Suhag Shukla, and I have very little time left with me now. Suhag Shukla, you know that it doesn't always end with debate and discussion, just an innocuous ad or a piece of column. It can actually become very difficult, and we have seen it happening in parts of England, in Leicester, etc. When you keep peddling hatred, it can result in violence. Do you sometimes feel scared for the community, number one? And number two, what would you expect the government of India, in what manner can they engage for greater awareness and to prevent such things from happening? Very quickly.
I have trust in law and order here in the United States, and I don't believe that there would be imminent violence. However, if it ratchets up enough, I would not want to be, correct on that. That I don't want to see violence that Hindus in England faced. In terms of what we can do, we just need to create more noise when there's misinformation out there. We need to also invest in our community member entering these fields like journalism, think tanks, careers in the public sector. All of those things in the long term can help promote a more accurate picture of India.
Fine. I think that's a very well put in very few words, and I shall have to stop it here now because I've completely run out of time. But before that, thank you so much, Suhag Shukla, for connecting to us at such short notice. You have tried to explain the situation very well to us. Certainly, we'll come back to you in one of our future episodes to know more about the situation. Thank you once again. Happy Diwali.
Happy Diwali. I look forward to joining you again.
And Professor Tiwari, always so gracious to join our show whenever we have requested him. Thank you, sir, for sharing your perspective on the situation and those thoughts. Thank you again and Happy Diwali.
Thank you and Happy Diwali to you and to you, Suhagji.
Likewise.
Viewers, the situation is not very encouraging, but as our guests have said, there is need to spread information for greater engagement and to create noise also, because this is the world of the media. On that note, it's a wrap up on Media Scan for this evening, but we shall come back to you next weekend. Till then, enjoy your Diwali.